So good morning to everyone. My own name and on behalf of the ILO, I thank you all for joining us today in this webinar on how OSHA at the workplace mitigates the consequences of the COVID. Special thanks to our keynote speakers, to our panelists, to our technical support guys that are allowing us to conduct this webinar and also to stream it through the Facebook and the YouTube. And also special thanks to our interpreter, Serhiy, which joined us from the US, and that allow us to carry on this webinar in both Ukrainian and English. This webinar was jointly organized by the EU-ILO Project, Tower Safe, Healthy and Declared Work in Ukraine, and by the Federation of Trade Unions of Ukraine and by the Confederation of Free Trade Unions of Ukraine. It is a good occasion, by the way, to remember and to celebrate the 102nd anniversary of the Technical Labor Inspection of Trade Unions of Ukraine. As you all know, COVID-19 pandemic is having devastating consequences in terms of economic and social well-being around the world. As for now, more than 4.2 million people were infected, around 300,000 people already died. There was hundreds of thousands of businesses and public services that locked down, and ILO estimates a loss of around 10.5% on the number of working hours, which corresponds to the loss of around 305 million. COVID pandemic, however, had at least one positive consequence. It exposed the absence and the fragilities and shortcomings of the OSH management systems of the workplaces and the need for their improvement. That is precisely the reason why we are all here. We are here in order to think about what can we really do in order to improve the occupational safety and health management systems at the business place, at the factory floor. Because really, if the occupational safety and health management system in place at the business level were properly implemented and functioning, it would be possible to mitigate the consequences of the COVID, to preserve the health and life of workers, and also to ensure business continuity. We have a very interesting and ambitious agenda and a very tight schedule for today. I am therefore happy to trust the facilitation of this webinar to Sofia Lytvyn, which is the ILO National Project Coordinator of our project, Tower Safe, Healthy and Declared Work in Ukraine. We will start with a set of very short opening remarks from our distinguished representatives of trade unions, which presence, by the way, I take the opportunity to thank. First of all, Magnus Berge, Senior Specialist of ACTRAV from ILO Budapest office, Hrygoriy Osovy, Head of the Federation of Trade Unions of Ukraine, Petro Tuley, Deputy Head of the Confederation of Trade Unions of Ukraine, Volodymyr Doroshenko from the Trade Unions of Railways Workers and Transport Construction Workers. We will then proceed with my presentation on how OSHA at workplace mitigates the consequences of COVID-19. And after that, we will have 6 very interesting presentations from our distinguished panelists. The next one will be made by Yuri Andriyevsky, which is the Chief of the Department of Labor Protection of the Federation of Trade Unions of Ukraine. And you will discuss the main challenges faced by the technical inspection of trade unions. Then Sergiy Symenko, Chief Technical Loss Inspector of the Confederation of Trade Unions of Ukraine, will look at COVID-19 crisis as a test to wash systems. Then Ludmyla Kharchuk, head of the Department of Occupational Hygiene of the State Labor Service of Ukraine, will address the conditions under which COVID-19 may be considered as occupational diseases. Then is Varyvonchyk, representing the Institute of Occupational Medicine, will discuss the monitoring of preventive work-related indicators related to COVID-19. Tetyana Horyun, head of Department of Technical Inspection on Labor Protection of the Federation of Trade Unions of Ukraine, will present some trade union recommendations on the prevention of coronavirus contagion at the workplaces. And finally, Diana Kazakova, leading inspector on labor protection of the Department of Labor Protection of the Federation of Trade Unions of Ukraine, and Ludmyla Kharchuk, head of the Department of Occupational Hygiene of the State Labor Service of Ukraine, will conclude the panelists' presentations discussing if COVID-19 is a case for investigation and what should be the role of trade unions. So, therefore, and without further delays, I will give the floor to Mr. Magnus Berge, senior panelist of ACTRAF from the ILO Budapest office. Thank you so much. Magnus Berge, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Antonia, and good morning to everybody. I'll start immediately by, on behalf of ACTRAF, to say a big thanks to Antonio and his team. I think this is a very good time to look at occupational health and safety. And I'm very happy that Antonio and the project is launching this webinar to speak directly for the trade unions and with the trade unions, because I think when we are finding a way out of this crisis, it's very difficult to do that in an orderly manner without the strong involvement of the trade unions in Ukraine. It is an unprecedented situation, and I'm also happy to see leaders from both unions here today at various levels being represented, because I think you are key to the response at national level, but also at enterprise level. I will not talk long today. I would want to remind everyone, you know very well, the main ILO convention that might be relevant today, 102, is ratified by Ukraine. I think that's important to remember. But we also have a whole variety of other ILO instruments that are very relevant in COVID-19 response. I'm not going through all of them now, but we will develop some material that can be useful in this regard. I think when it comes to the COVID-19 response, is a test of how democratic countries are, how willing the governments are to involve the two social partners in the work to mitigate the crisis, to stop the worst fallout. And now, maybe in the coming months, we will see a very important phase, which is about return to work, trying to return back to normal, or as we in the ILO say, we want to return back to a better normal, a normal that was better than what it was before. And this can be done if we are good at including all three partners and increase the democratic governance of the world of work. I'm not going to touch in on all the different issues that unions can be involved in, but when you are returning to work and reopening the economy, it's very important that the workers feel safe to return. And when they feel safe to return, I think that safety can be assured with a bipartite approach, and that the trade unions can play a role in ensuring workers that it's safe to return, and to ensure that the work environment is safe and healthy at the workplaces. So that trust is needed. The union has a big role to play. I think a good step in the right direction is the webinar you are having today. Again, I would like to thank the project staff and the participants. I will be a little bit on and off camera, but I will try to follow this meeting because I think it's very important. I wish you all the best for a productive meeting today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Magnus. Keep safe. We will be in touch. With no further delays, I will give the floor to Pan Hrygoriy Osovy, head of the Federation of Trade Unions of Ukraine. Good morning. You have the floor. 2 minutes.
All right, I just need to make sure that you can hear me. All right, dear friends and colleagues, again, hello and welcome. It's good to see this thing going on, the webinar. Nothing can replace an immediate communication. I wish I could see all of you by my side doing fine, but the subject we're going to discuss this time is very topical for today's situation. I'm sorry, says the host. You have to choose the Russian channel on the interface. Yeah, you gotta choose the Russian channel because he might be in the same channel with the interpreter. Okay, let me see where it is. I think I can see everybody here.
We are listening to you, Pan Hrygoriy Osovy.
Я чую, Антоніо, тебе, але чому немає підключення мене, я не можу зрозуміти. Так чути?
If it works fine, let's go on.
Тоді працює.
Antonio, can you hear me as well?
Тоді працюємо. Шановні колеги, ще раз
let's go on.
Ще раз привертаю увагу до актуальності цього вебінару і теми, яку сьогодні обрали для дискусії. Україна, як багато інших країн світу, перебуває в стані пандемії, і зрозуміло, що робота багатьох секторів економіки була паралізованою, але з часом має робота бути відновлена.
But over time, they need to return to normal operations. Hopefully, on the 22nd of May, the government will alleviate the quarantine and some jobs will be reopened, so people will be able to go back to work. And we need to come up with effective recommendations for them to make sure that they go back to work safely after the pandemic. So we gotta create a safe work environment at every workplace. That's what I want my colleagues to do in the Federation of Trade Unions, and we're working on it. We are drafting recommendations for our affiliates, and hopefully this discussion in this webinar will allow us to come up with an overall vision and recommendations for each affiliated organization. I know that a few days later, a similar webinar is going to happen involving the employers' organizations. So maybe in this particular project, we could jointly draft a number of recommendations and illustrations, videos, as a way of explaining things to people, and that's going to be useful to each trade union organization. I think trade unions could initiate extra consultations with employers, and they need to possibly try and make changes to the collective agreements and posh practices that you get in those agreements. And that will determine the peculiarities of posh practices at work. And also, use this opportunity, I'd like to say hello and welcome to all technical inspectors in the trade unions and in government institutions. It's been 102nd anniversary of the State Labor Inspectorate. Well, it first happened when we had the Ukrainian Republic and we established something like the State Labor Service, and it is something that the country needed even back then. And this service has been around for quite a long time, taking care of health and safety of workers at work. And in the course of the webinar, I think we need to also consider the safety of medics themselves. Unfortunately, the country has not been able to do well in these circumstances. Quite some medics have been affected. They got infected, and it's quite a huge number. 1 in every 5 medics in this country that has been infected is a medic. So that's a particular concern to me, and we need to respond to this. So I'd like to wish all participants in this webinar productive and active proceedings in coming up with resulting recommendations for trade unions and employers in this country in order to improve OSH practices in this pandemic situation. Thank you.
So, дуже дякую, пан Hrygoriy Osovy. So, without no further delays, I will hand over the floor to Petro, Deputy Head of the Confederation of Free Trade Unions of Ukraine. You have the floor, sir.
Brothers and sisters, I'm happy to welcome you at the start of this webinar. It is indeed something we gotta do in this pandemic situation. We need to consider the role of trade unions in this, and we appreciate the ILO for making it happen. Also, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the chair, Sergiy, and he is also taking part in the conference online with German colleagues, and they're discussing mine pit problems. So the importance of this workshop is clear to everybody. It speaks for itself. We can see what is going on in the world and in this country, and trade unions should be a part of this, because the workplace is where all of these things happen. Trade unions need to see, need to figure out what to do, what's the best way of doing things. They actually need to make sure that all employers do right things for the sake of safety at each workplace. I guess that's the only way. And if we follow this path, then we're going to do better. So I think we're going to be discussing those kinds of things today, and we're going to keep referring to the ILO recommendations. We might hear something about it from them. So to me, it's an important subject that must be discussed today. We can see what's going on and we can see what's going wrong. So together we need to think it over, and that will allow us to reduce the morbidity rate and improve the safety of workers. And I'd like to say that I agree with what Hrygoriy has said. I also would like to welcome all of the technical inspectors from trade unions. Congratulations on the 102nd anniversary. It's a great achievement, and to me, trade unions are the ones that should do their part of the job, and they initiated many important things in the history of this. So I'm speaking about 8 hours workday, safety at work. So those are the things you guys have initiated, and congratulations to all of you on the anniversary of the technical inspection. And I'd like to wish everybody fruitful proceedings, and I'd like to once again commend the ILO for organizing this event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Petro Tuley. I will pass the floor to Volodymyr Doroshenko, representing the trade unions of railways workers and transport construction workers of Ukraine. You have the floor, Volodymyr Doroshenko.
Good morning, dear colleagues. I'd like to briefly tell you about the history of this matter. On the 18th of May of 1918, the Council of People's Commissioners made a decree to establish the technical inspection inspectorate, and it was supposed to take care of life, health, and safety at work for everybody that are employed in certain companies or businesses. So they have set up the labor inspectorate in the railway sector too. And in 1921, they had 250 people working for that service. Later on the same year, the railway trade union made sure that 5% of funds be spent on OSH improvements in the sector. In 1923, they established a provision on technical inspectors in railway tracks. They had 90% of the staff they needed, so they were, well, some people were still missing, but they only had 36 people which had higher education in that staff. But still, in 1923, the inspection experts in the railway sector addressed more than 18,000 complaints, and they investigated more than 500 accidents at work and 700 accidents of other kind. In February of 1924, they organized a sectoral conference of railroad sector. Later on, they organized training courses for labor inspectors. And in 1931, they organized an Institute of Civil Inspectors of OSH. In 1933, technical inspectorate in railway sector was subordinated to the Central Committee of the Railway Trade Union. The subordination of the technical inspector to the trade unions paid off at that time. Trade unions actually had financial capacities so that workers of the inspectorate would be well paid and could do their job well. They could supervise things and make sure that OSH laws be fulfilled in the sector. They could also influence companies, and they could make sure some people could be dismissed if they were doing wrong things. So that would improve the level of safety across the sector. Technical inspectorate has seen lots of changes and modifications in its history. It would get different titles, it would be subordinated to different institutions. In 1959, the staff of the organization featured offices of chief technical OSH inspectors. It's been quite a difficult thing to move on in these conditions, and yet the service in the railway sector has been able to succeed. Since 2002, it has been called the Technical Labor Inspectorate, and it has the Council of Trade Unions of the railway sector, and it's involved in everything that is ever done because they strive to protect safety and health of people in the sector, as well as social security of victims of accidents, and it covers their families too. Over 70 years, the Technical Labor Inspectorate has been able to successfully perform these functions. It operated as the organization in charge of state supervision on OSH. Nowadays, the organization and the Committee of Trade Unions, as a part of it, exercises civil watch over adherence to OSH requirements. Workers need to enjoy appropriate sanitary and production conditions. They make sure that people get enough protective gear, that they get compensated if they have to do hazardous work in hazardous conditions. They protect people against accidents at work. The technical labor inspectors, based on their knowledge and competencies and proficiency, seek to make sure that workers could exercise their legal rights to work. They protect legal interests of victims of accidents or victims affected by industrial diseases. Our organization cordially welcomes the veterans of Technical Inspectorate, which are now retired, and the workers which worked for a long time in respective offices of the organization, trying to make sure that everybody be protected adequately under the law, especially the unionized people. So I'd like to wish you happiness and well-being and creative inspiration in this noble cause. Congratulations to all of you, fellow colleagues. Speaking of this particular webinar, the Council of Trade Unions of the Railway Sector drafted a provision to aid medics in case they contract coronavirus. They temporarily lose their ability to work in that case, and they should get 3,000 hryvnia worth of aid. If it's a lethal outcome, then a family would get 7,500 hryvnia. That's the provision that we have come up with to aid medics in some way. Thank you for your attention. Again, congratulations, be safe, and take care of your loved ones. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Volodymyr Doroshenko. We are a bit behind schedule, so I will speed up the process and give the floor to our webinar moderator, Pani Sofia Lytvyn. Thank you.
Hello, Antonio. Hello, everybody. Before we move on to Antonio's presentation, I'd like to address a few ground rules for presenters and participants. So we've got a lot of things to come in the course of the webinar, and everybody should abide by certain rules. As a way of helping me in doing that, our colleague Inna will be keeping the time, and 3 minutes before you're supposed to be done, she will let you know about that. She will text you or do something else to let you know about that. The administrator will then turn off the mic if your time is up. So that's how we can move on. So I'd like for all presenters to be mindful of the time limits, and you need to try and share all of your key messages within the time you're given. So we are happy, we are welcoming questions from participants. We're going to have time for that. So whenever you have a question, you can put it in the chat. You need to write the word question so that I can see it as a question. I would look at that and I will see which of the speakers can answer this question. I think there will be lots of questions, and I'm not sure we can field all of them in the course of this webinar. So we're going to choose the most relevant questions, the most interesting ones, but the rest of the questions will not be left unanswered. Following this webinar, we're going to deliver the answers to them as well through the Facebook, in writing, or maybe we're going to make a short video as a way of answering the rest of the questions. We're going to be showing abridged presentations of presenters, but after the webinar, you will get over the email some request forms, which will help you produce your feedback of this webinar. So once you have completed the form, you're going to get a link which will allow you to download the full versions of all of the presentations. So let's move on now, and I'd like to turn over back to Antonio Santos. He will make a keynote presentation here. He will address COVID problem in terms of safety and health at work. And what are the key instruments that are there to manage risks at work? How can it help mitigate the consequences of COVID pandemic for workers and employers? So for this, I would like to share the screen with his presentation on it.
I'll try to do my best, and I hope I will not be the first victim of inner Hrygoriy. So, if I may, good morning to everybody again. The title of the presentation, as Sofia Lytvyn already said, is how OSHA to workplace can really mitigate the consequences of COVID-19, and by the way, of any other occupational risk. So we are going to, through the coronavirus nature, we will talk about the main applicable EU and international labor standards and guidelines. Then we will talk shortly about the employer's main responsibilities and also the responsibilities and rights of the workers. Then we will try to understand what can we really do, employers, workers in the workplace, in order to mitigate the consequences of coronavirus. We will talk about the importance of implementing occupational safety and health services at the business level, and we also will address how the occupational risk can be properly managed at the workplace. Then we will give some examples of occupational safety and health measures that preventive and protective that can be applied in the workplaces to prevent coronavirus risk contagion. Then we will present short conclusions of the presentation, and then we will share with you some World OSH Day 2020 materials. So, coronavirus, first of all, is an occupational hazard, as you can see on slide 3, as it is a biological agent that can be introduced into workplaces, that can be transmitted within the workplaces, and then can also be transmitted to outside the workplaces. It's contagious, is therefore an occupational risk. And as any other occupational risk, and we are talking about noise, chemical agents, musculoskeletal disorders, mechanical vibrations, etc. As it happens with any other occupational risk, this risk has to be assessed and has to be controlled. It has to be controlled through the implementation of preventive and protective measures in order to eliminate or reduce its probability of occurrence and also the consequences or the severity of its consequences to the worker safety and health. And that could come as a surprise for you. But really, although the concrete measures to reduce or eliminate coronavirus contagious risk depend on its specific nature, meaning the way it is transmitted, the good news is that the risk management process in itself, hazard identification, identification of the exposed workers, the estimation of the risk, the evaluation of the risk, and the risk control phases are exactly the same that could be applied in any other occupational risks. So you just have to stick to the process and apply it effectively at the workplaces. Because implementation of adequate OSH management systems at the business level can really mitigate the impact of COVID-19, can save lives, and can ensure business continuity. And we can always apply to the main EU and international labor standards and guidelines, as shown in the next slide. And they are, besides the ILO Convention number 155 on occupational safety and health in the work environment, that was already mentioned during this webinar, and its recommendation 164. We will also have an ILO Convention on the occupational health services, which also give us guidelines and standards that should be followed at the workplaces in order to prevent the exposure of workers to occupational risks. We also have the ILO OSH guidelines on occupational safety and management, occupational safety and health management systems, 2001, and we also have two very important European Union labor standards on OSH, which are first the European Union OSH Framework Directive 89-391, and also the European Union Directive 2000-45 on the exposure of workers to biological agents. These are truly a set of EU and international labor standards that should be applied in all workplaces, no matter if it is a private workplaces or is a public service workplace, they should be applied in order to mitigate the consequences of all occupational risks, and in particular, this one that we are addressing, the coronavirus contagions. As for the employer's main responsibilities, as you can see on the next slide, well, according to these standards, it is the main responsibility of the employers to ensure that that occupational safety and health of the workers in every, they have the responsibility to ensure the safety and health of the workers in all aspects related with the work, with strict observance of the hierarchical and sequential general principles of prevention, which are as shown on the slide, and especially trying to avoid the risks from the outset. And then, regarding the risks that cannot be avoided, they should be assessed. And then, as highlighted, there should be occupational risk prevention plan, which foresees for the assessed risks what should be the preventive and protective measures of to prevent the exposure of the workers to occupational risks. Basically, what the employers should do is, first of all, set up occupational safety and health services, to provide those services to the workers, either internally or externally if they don't have the resources to ensure it internally. They should provide information and training to workers in occupational safety and health issues. They should ensure the consultation and the participation of the workers in all matters that concerns their occupational safety and health. They should ensure an emergency response system. They should also ensure that the workers' health is properly surveyed or monitored, and also they should provide to workers when other measures are not enough to mitigate the risks, collective protective equipment and also personal protective equipment. And of course, the measures to manage the risks should be, of course, free of any charge for the workers. So in general, what the employer should do is, first of all, avoid the risks, then assess the risks that cannot be avoided, and then adopt the risk control measures, preventive and protective measures, in order to ensure the safety and health of the workers. This is basically the obligations of the employers in terms of OSH. The workers, for their side, as you can see on the next slide, have the right to participate, to be consulted, to be informed, and to be trained on OSH. They also have the right to remove themselves from situations of imminent and serious danger to their life and health. But they have also responsibilities. And their first responsibility is to take care of their own safety and health, and the safety and health of the others that can be affected by their actions or their omissions. They also have the responsibility to make correct use of the work equipment, the safe devices, and the personal protective equipment. They should also report to the employer any situations of serious and immediate dangers for occupational safety and health of their own or of their colleagues or visitors or suppliers. And finally, they should cooperate with the employer and with workers with OSH responsibilities in improving OSH at the workplaces, and in particular in identifying the hazards, in assessing the risks, in identifying the most appropriate protective and preventive measures that should be applied, and on the application and the implementations of those measures. So what can be done at the workplaces in order to prevent the exposures of workers to occupational risks, to any occupational risks, and in particular to this coronavirus contagious risk? First of all, ensure that there is in place occupational safety and health services. It means that the employer should develop a system of providing occupational safety and health services to their workers. And those services, as foreseen on the ILO Convention 161 on occupational health services, include, for example, risk assessment and control, monitor risk factors in work practices and in the environment, and provide advice on planning and organizing work and on the selection of the material components of work, be that work equipment, chemical agents or substances used on work, may that be the organization of the layout of the production floor, may that be the relation, the working time, etc. Also, that occupational safety and health services should also provide other services like developing the plans and programs to improve OSH. They should also be in charge of analyzing work-related accidents and occupational diseases, and also to ensure the health surveillance of the workers, among other services. Secondly, and especially, what should be done in the workplaces is to really implement a risk management system, because we cannot fight what we don't know. And to know what are we fighting, we have to understand how it appears at the workplaces, how it works on what are the consequences of the exposure of the workers to the agent, and what should be done in order to prevent not only the occurrence of that contagious, but also to reduce the negative consequences and the gravity of the consequences on the health of the workers. But to know that, we have to assess those risks. So the most important aspect of ensuring and securing the occupational safety and health of the workers is really manage the risk. And manage risks implies, first, identifying what are the hazards. Second, what are the potentially exposed workers. Third, assess the risks, estimate their magnitude, and also evaluate that risk and compare the risk estimated with the standards to understand if the risk is either acceptable or not. And if it is not acceptable, then we need to identify the most appropriate preventive and protect measures to eliminate that risk. And we should draw up a plan, and we should follow it. We should identify for each hazard and risk what are the preventive and protect measures, when they should be implemented, by who should control it, in order to ensure that the measures are not just identified, but they are implemented effectively at the workplaces. And then we need to ensure that after the implementation of the measures, the risk is continually assessed, because the risks also have composite effects. They affect themselves, and they are affected by the measures that are taken. So it's not enough to take the measures identified. Then we have to continuously assess the risks in order to ensure that they are really eliminated or reduced. One example, for example, and regarding COVID, for example, it is expected that the problems with the chemical agents used to disinfect the hands, for example, might also have some collateral effects on the exposure of workers to chemical agents. Dermatitis, allergies, and that kind of consequences are resulting from the measures that are implemented to eliminate another risk. So the risks and the occupational safety and health measures, they have collateral effects between themselves. So and those should also be assessed and should be dealt with. So first of all, identification of hazards and exposed works, risk assessment, so risk estimation, valuation, and hierarchization, and this should be written down in a report, the risk assessment report. Then, following the risk assessment, there should be the identification of the concrete prevention and protective measures that should be implemented, by whom, when, who checks it. That is the content of a prevention plan. Then those measures should be implemented, and then that implementation should be monitored and follow up and reviewed. And then again, risk assessment again of the situation at any moment in the workplace. So this is the next slide. The slide 9 gives you an idea of the phases of the risk management process. Identification of hazards, risk estimation, risk evaluation, prevention measure, protective measure, and then again feedback in this continuous process. As you can see on slide 10, this is a slide that the idea is to give you some hints about what are the aspects that you should look into at the workplaces in order to facilitate the identification of the hazards and the exposed workers. To identify hazards, casual agents, and exposure conditions, we should gather all the relevant information related to each work activity, all the tasks that are done, places where the work is done, who does the work, other people that may be affected, like clients, like suppliers, like visitors, like the general public. What are the level of training and the specificities of the training that is given to the workers? Is there any written worker procedures or work authorizations? What are the characteristics of the facilities, the equipment, the tools used, the energies used, the composition of the raw materials and the final product, etc., etc., etc. Then it is also important to ensure that all groups of workers and subcontractors that might be affected by the conditions at the workplace are considered. And it's not just the workers of the office or the workers of the factory floor. It's also the suppliers. It's also people that contributes to a business, but they are not seen, like night cleaner crews, like maintenance personnel, like the guards, so they should also be considered. And in particular, we should also take into consideration the characteristics of the most vulnerable workers, like young workers, pregnant women that recently have given birth or are breastfeeding, foreign workers that do not speak the local language, for example, new admitted workers that have no enough training, workers with disabilities, etc. As for the risk assessment, the first phase of risk assessment is risk estimation, and basically is to estimate the magnitude of the risk. And to estimate the magnitude of the risk, we have to estimate regarding each risk factor what is its probability of occurrence and what is the severity or the gravity of its consequences. And the risk would be the product of these qualifications. This is a merely example of, with a matrix of the way to do it. You have, for example, a specific risk, and you define 3 grades of probability of occurrence: very unlikely, unlikely, likely, or very likely. And you attribute a qualification. And the same for the gravity. It is light, it is irreversible, or fatal, or very serious. And then for each risk factor, you attribute a probability and also a gravity. And the product will give you the level of risk. This is risk estimation in the most simplest way to do it. Then, once you as you can see on the next slide, you have to evaluate that risk. First, you have a magnitude of the risk that give you the level of the risk. But then you have to compare that level of risk with any standards, national standards, international standards, that might give you an idea if that risk is acceptable or is not, or is unacceptable. As for the acceptable risks, you do not have to implement any specific measures. But as soon as the risk, the estimated risk, is higher than any threshold that is contained on the legislation, national or international legislation, or in any international standard like the ISO standards, then you have to take measures, preventive measures. And of course, you should start by the risks that are intolerable. That is the ones we should focus on. You have to hierarchize the risks depending on their valuation and start for the ones that are intolerable and that the work cannot proceed while they are not reduced or eliminated. And then once, as you can see on the next slide, once the risk is properly evaluated, you have to control it. So risk control is about to implement the measures to eliminate or reduce the risks that are considered unacceptable, the ones that are beyond or that has a level of risk that is higher than any existing standard or legal threshold. And that implies the definition of the preventive and protective measures that should be implemented on the workplace to eliminate or reduce the probability of occurrence of that risk and the gravity of their consequences. And these measures should be contained in a prevention plan. Besides the definition of the preventive and protective measures that should be applied, the prevention plan should also include the definition of the objectives, indicators, targets, means, resources, and the necessary timetable to implement those measures. And then it should have a responsible for their implementation and a responsible for controlling and following up if they were properly implemented and when. And then this prevention plan should be monitored in order to ensure that all the foreseen measures were timely implemented. The next slides, the next set of slides, give you some examples of some occupational safety and health preventive and protective measures that can be implemented at the workplaces in order to mitigate the risk of coronavirus contagions. The first set of measures has to do with physical distancing. And physical distance is probably now we are just focused on coronavirus. Physical distancing is probably the best way to reduce the probability of occurrence of coronavirus transmission. It implies, first of all, the adoption at the business level and at any workplace of new principles of social conduct. They imply refraining from hugging, from kissing, or from shaking hands. They also imply the reorganization of the work in order to ensure that the physical distance between people that otherwise would interact closely at work. It means between workers and customers, workers and suppliers, visitors, public, etc. And there are a lot of measures that can be used in order to reorganize work and to reduce the and to ensure the physical distance. First of all, the teleworking. In Portugal, for example, one of the measures that were taken by the government in order to ensure the physical distancing is that he published a law in which is said that teleworking should be the rule during this quarantine period if it is possible. So all the work that can be done in a teleworking regime should adopt that system. That is a way of avoiding that people are able to transmit it between themselves, the coronavirus. But of course, there are situations, work situations, in which the work cannot be done without physical presence. That cannot be substituted for telework. So in that case, we should look into other possibilities, like, for example, like working hours or additional work shifts with fewer people in each work shift. That could be, for example, anticipation of the paid annual leave period, for example. Or if the workers cannot be dispensed, they cannot be in a working regime like teleworking, well, and if they are within the category of workers that are more vulnerable or that would have more severe consequences if they were infected by COVID, like older workers or workers that have already a health precondition that could be aggravated by the COVID, well, another alternative would be providing to those workers a paid dispension from work. Other situations that could be other measures that could be implemented to ensure physical distance, for example, is the substitution of physical contacts by other type of contacts, like contacts by phone, email, or virtual meetings online, like we are doing now. Other measures include ensuring the maximum distance possible between workstations, even with the installation of physical barriers or signaling barriers, avoiding crowding of people at workplaces, like through cancellation of gatherings, social or sport events, institution of lag hours for the use of common areas or spaces like the cafeteria, meeting rooms, library, etc. Limit the number of persons, workers, clients, or public allowed to be simultaneous in a given place, and limit it to a fraction of its capacity. For example, 1/3, or to a given ratio per square meter, like 0.04 persons per square meter, or something like that. Limit the minimum distance between people to a specific number of meters, like 1 meter in open space or 2 meters indoor, and put appropriate safety signs to inform people of the distance that they should keep from each other. And that is common in shops, airports, pharmacy, information services, etc., supermarkets. Another measure that could be adopted is to forbid the presence of public or customers at workplaces and delivery products at the premises door or at the customer's domicile, but without the entrance of the worker at customer's premises. Other alternative would be prevent suppliers from entering workplaces by receiving the orders, for example, raw materials, at the entrance of the business, not allowing them to really enter into the workplace. There can be other measures, like, for example, implementation of different circulation paths, different enter and exit doors and circulation path, different passes per circulation direction, for example. Other measures include, for example, installing physical barriers like glass or acrylic windows, shutters, or whatever, especially in front office workstations. There are other measures that has to do with hygiene, and the most important of them is the promotion of a good respiratory hygiene at the workplaces. For example, covering your mouth and nose with your bent elbow or tissue when you cough or sneeze. And employers have the obligation to inform workers about this. Ensure easily accessible places to wash hands with soap and water and paper towels to dry them is another important measure. Another one is to provide workers with easily accessible alcohol-based antiseptic solutions for hands hygiene. Another measure is promoting a culture of hand washing and the adoption of adequate basic procedures for hands hygiene. Another important measure is to forbid eating or drinking in the working areas. And regarding hygiene, another measure very important is to promote the non-sharing between workers or personal work and domestic items like cell phones, headphones, personal protective equipment, crockery and kitchen utensils, clothes, uniforms, towels, and food. They should be forbidden to share these type of items in order to prevent the contagion at work. There is another area where measures should be taken, which is on the area of cleaning the workplaces and the work equipments. And the employers should be responsible to promote a culture of regularly cleaning with adequate detergent and or disinfectant, surfaces of desks, telephones and keyboards, workstations, work equipment, work tools and personal protective equipment, doorknobs, handrails, counters, light switches, elevator buttons, vending machines, payment terminals, dispensers, etc. And also special concern is the cleaning schedules of common areas such as toilets, restrooms, cafeterias, meeting rooms, etc. Another very important type of measures, preventive measures that should be implemented at the workplaces has to do with the provision of information and training to managers, workers, and their representatives. And that information is crucial. It should be provided information and training regarding the risks to which the workers are exposed and regarding the adopted measures to prevent their exposure, in particular to the coronavirus we are talking about. There should be also provided information and training regarding the physical distancing measures, the principles of social conduct, the respiratory hygiene, procedures for hand washing and cleaning of premises and material components of work. Also information how to act in case of a COVID infection. Information and training about how to use, maintain and dispose personal protective equipment. Information and training on updates regarding the COVID-19 situation at the workplace, region or country. And information about the right of the workers to remove themselves from a work situation that poses an imminent and serious danger for their life or else. Other important measures has to do with the responsibility of the employers regarding the air surveillance of the workers and also the implementation of response mechanisms. And in this case, employers should safeguard the surveillance of worker health according to local health authorities' guidelines, and they should in particular ensure that workers with suspected symptoms of COVID-19 do not, I repeat, do not come to the workplace. However, in case of the development of COVID-19 symptoms at the work site, well, there should be measures to ensure that the worker communicates this situation to a supervisor and moves himself to the isolation area defined in a contingency plan or an emergency plan, while waiting for transfer to an appropriate health facility. Worker or employer also should contact the authorities. Employees should notify occupational safety and health services or the occupational physician and adequately disinfect the workplace. Also, it should provide health surveillance of persons who have been in close contact with infected workers. Also, it should be advisable to expand workers' access to paid sick leave, sickness benefits, and parental care leave, and inform all workers about this opportunity. And finally, when all other measures were not enough in order to reduce or eliminate the occupational risk, and in particular the coronavirus contagion risk, employers should provide workers with adequate personal protective equipment and inform them and training on their use, maintenance, and the disposal. But before doing so, before providing the PPEs, employers should assess the risks and determine what are the most appropriate PPEs for the workers. And they should also take into account the possibility of these PPEs have to be used with other PPEs. And it should be assessed how should these PPEs be used together in order to prevent that the risks, instead of being mitigated, are increasing. Well, we are almost done. I already received some notification that my time is almost up, so I will drop immediately to conclusions. And the most important conclusions would be that coronavirus is an occupational hazard, and its transmission at work is an occupational risk. Employers have the responsibility to assess risks resulting from the exposure of workers to coronavirus, and have the obligation to control them through the implementation of adequate occupational safety and health preventive and protective measures. Workers, on the other hand, should take care of their own health and that of others that can be affected by them, and inform and cooperate with the employer in matters of OSH, in particular in risk assessment and control. And it is important to note that the implementation of adequate occupational safety and health management systems contribute to reduce the negative impacts of COVID-19 pandemic, or of any other type of biological agent, being it a bacteria, a fungus, or a virus, on workers' health, and especially on business continuity. Because it's not just about preventing the spread of the virus in the workplace, and to secure the health and safety of the workers. It's also about ensuring that that is done, and at the same time the business continues to run. Because otherwise, in the future, when will be lost 305 million jobs, we will have a problem, which is ensuring the economic and social sustainability of the countries. Because otherwise, people will not have anywhere to go back to. So it is important that the occupational health, occupational safety and health management systems are not just seen as a way to preserve lives, health and safety of the workers, but also a way of ensuring that that is done, and at the same time the business are still running. So, and finally, I will draw your attention to the next slide, where you can see some resources and materials on COVID, which is, by the way, the theme of the World OSH Day of 2020. ILO switched, in face of the COVID pandemic, switched the theme of the World OSH Day 2020 from the harassment at work to safety and health at work. Stop the pandemic, safety and health at work can save lives. And ILO globally developed a series of resources and materials on this theme, and our project translated them into Ukrainian. So they are available on the project website. You can go there and you can download them, and they are very, very interesting. So I'm now available for any questions that you might have. So Sofia Lytvyn, over to you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Antonio. I appreciate your ability to be on time. So there are 3 questions we've got for you. Question number 1. What's the current situation in the EU countries in terms of labor inspection? Are they quarantining now? Are they sitting at homes, labor inspectors, or are they mobilized and are they involved in doing something in this situation? You know, because of the quarantine for companies and organizations right now, people cannot go back to work. Labor inspectors cannot do their job. They're working online as much as they can. So what's happening in the EU countries in this regard? Question number 2. You spoke earlier on about the risk assessment and evaluation systems, risk management, indicating that the employer has to play a key role in that. But we're speaking with trade unions at this webinar. So trade unions would like to see what's their role in this. So apart from the employer, what can trade unions do for the sake of better OSH practices at work? And question number 3. Let's imagine that the framework directive on OSH of the EU 89/391 has been implemented. Let's just imagine that. Do you think it would have a certain benefit for workplaces in this country, or would it be pretty much the same situation as it is today? So 3 questions and 7 minutes for all of them.
Thank you so much, Sofia, for the questions. Well, I will address them as in the order that you put them. So, as for the first one, what is the current situation in EU regarding labor inspection activity in times of COVID? What they are doing as compared to Ukraine, that they have kind of a moratorium during this quarantine period on inspection visits. So I cannot speak for all EU because I'm not aware of all situation in all 27 countries of EU. But I have a pretty good idea of what is going on in several countries. And in general, labor inspection in EU is good, is working. They don't have any moratorium that prevent them to inspect workplaces, and for one reason. And is that the fact that they are particularly needed now. Labor inspection is not about, and that is the wrong idea. Labor inspection does not exist to impose fines to employers. Labor inspection exists according to the ILO Conventions 81 and 129 for 3 major reasons, and these are the major functions of the labor inspection system. First, to provide technical advice and information to workers, employers, and their representatives on the best way to comply with the legislation, to promote, control, and enforce the application of the labor relations and OSH legislation, and to brought to the attention of the competent body any gaps on the legislation that should be breached. That is the main functions of the labor inspection, and I don't see there any major function on imposing fines. Fines is a mean, it's not an end. So, and the idea in EU is that one, is that labor inspection are there with the mission of improving working conditions. And in times where the working conditions should be improved, like these ones, in which we have a crisis, is precisely where labor inspection should be more active. And when I say more active, I'm not saying more active on enforcing or imposing fines. No, more active on informing workers, on supporting workers, on helping workers and employers to develop and to implement these risk management systems, these occupational safety and health services. That's what I'm talking about. And for example, in Portugal, which is the case that I know best, there were taken several measures by the current government regarding labor inspection. And there were, for example, there were running two competitions for admission of labor inspectors. One of those was right in the middle. They have just finishing their theoretical inception training, and the government anticipated their integration as labor inspectors before the completion of all the inception training, and there was 50. Then there was another competition, an external competition for 80 labor inspectors, and the final list had not been posted yet, were not decided yet, so the government gave orders in order to speed up the process and to engage them immediately on the inception training. And plus, the government allowed the Inspector General of the Portuguese Authority for Labor Conditions, Working Conditions, to request to any other inspection services the number of labor inspectors, the number of inspectors that she needed for the Portuguese Labor Inspectorate, and she can until a number of 100, she can immediately request them, and the heads of the other inspection services cannot say no. So you see that on Europe, you assist to a strengthening of the capacity of labor inspection to help workers and to help employers to deal with this COVID situation crisis. That's what I see in Europe. Second question, risk assessment, risk management. I talk about what employers should do. Well, workers should. And I'm sorry, I also talked about what is the role of the workers. The workers are supposed to cooperate with the employer. They are supposed to help the employer to assess the risk, because they are the ones that know better the workplaces in which they work. So they are fundamental to help the employer to fulfill his own obligations. First of all, workers should be concerned about their own safety and health, and the other ones that are affected by their actions and omissions, but also they have the legal obligation to assist the employer, to help and to cooperate with the employer in the risk assessment, in the identification of the hazards, in the identification of the most suitable preventive and protect measures to secure their own health and safety, and the health and safety of the others. So workers are fundamental, because, guys, what are an enterprise? A piece of paper. An enterprise without workers is an abstraction. So workers are fundamental, and workers are the ones that get the job done and get the things done. The employer is the one that has the obligation, but the workers are who can do it really at the workplace. Finally, the third question has to do with, and if the European Union OSH Framework Directive 89/391 was already implemented in Ukraine, what would be different? What would be different, or how Ukraine would be more prepared to? Well, I think the response is obvious. If the European Union OSH Framework Directive was already transposed to national legislation in Ukraine, I would say that Ukraine would have better conditions to be more effective on the fight against this coronavirus, definitely. But it will not be enough. It will not be enough, because besides having the legislative framework, you also have to have the means to promote the law and to enforce the law, to make it happen on the ground. Because you having laws, but not having a way to promote it and to enforce it, the laws are just pieces of paper. So the most important step would be really to transpose the European Union OSH Framework Directive, as foreseen, by the way, in the association agreement, but also to create the mechanisms through which the law could be accessible and could be in place and could be promoted, and the workers could be aware of that, employers could be aware of that, informed about their provisions, and then that law would be complied with. So labor inspection has to have the means and the powers in order to promote the law, enforce the law, and inform and provide technical advices to employers, workers, and their representatives about its provisions. But in general, I would say that the employers and the workers would be much more prepared and more resilient to this COVID crisis than they are now without this legal framework. Because for starters, the most important, the most basic procedures that should be in place in order to mitigate the consequences of COVID is assess the risks, implement control measures, in short, manage the risk. And the current Ukrainian legislation does not foresee that. So it is very, very difficult to fight a risk, whatever risk it is, if you don't know what the risk is, if you don't assess the risk, and if you don't know what are the most appropriate measures to eliminate or reduce it. So I would say that if really Ukraine have already transposed the EU OSH Framework Directive, it would be more prepared and would be more resilient to the devastating consequences of COVID-19 at the workplaces, obviously. So if you don't have any more questions, I thank you for your attention, and I give back the floor to Sofia Lytvyn. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. We didn't have to turn the microphone off. Everything's on time, so we are on schedule. I appreciate the questions. You're welcome to be more active, everybody. So I think it's time you could wake up and see what's going on. So think of more questions and I'll see them. With this, I'd like to turn over to Yuri Andriyevsky, representing the Health Department of the Federation of Ukraine's Trade Unions. Okay, we can see Yuri, and he will speak about COVID-19, new challenge for Technical Inspectorate of Trade Unions, priorities for 2020-2021. Okay, let's have it. You have it till 11:40. Okay, thank you, I got it. Antonio has made an interesting presentation. I really appreciate it. So from the very outset, I'd like to say a big hello and welcome to all of the fellow unionists, and congratulations on the 102nd anniversary of the Inspectorate. And I'd like to speak on behalf of the veterans of the service. It is our Occupational Red Letter Day. It's a big anniversary, and we would like to share our congratulations as the veterans of the service. And we'd like to wish everybody else good health, happiness, and springtime well-being. May you always find a way to overcome any troubles in life. So they have had me share this message from them with you. The loftiest values are life and health of people. The coronavirus pandemic has shown the way these values are upheld in this country and in the rest of the world. Trade unions have always been active in terms of protecting health and life of people, workers. In particular, in this country, they always speak about the need for government supervision in the world of work, because up to now, our practices are not in line with the conventions ratified by this country, 81 and 129. Human-centric policy should be found in the official health policy in the country, in the businesses of the country. Nowadays, this policy is not a top priority item on the government agenda. In the government action plan, we do not see the mention of OSH, actually. In this country, OSH has been in a crisis for the last several years. With this pandemic in place, the matters have gotten worse. In this country, we have one of the world's highest rates of work-related injuries, lethal injuries as well. Many of those cases never end up in the official statistics. If we speak about occupational diseases, we've got a low rate of annual detection of those. Over the last 3 years, 80 to 90% of occupational diseases that happen every year are never detected because the patients themselves never report them. In 2020, we may expect that the number of newly detected cases of occupational diseases might go up because some of the diseases will be registered among medics, will be found among medics. The results of investigations will reveal some statistics, some data. Trade unions believe that low detection rate of occupational diseases among workers is attributed to the fact that particular medical services have been removed in companies, and there's an overall deterioration of medical checkups in this country, health checkups. That practice is almost gone in this country. In order to protect people against coronavirus, we need to make sure that employers and workers take precautionary measures. And Antonio mentioned some of that. In the OSH departments, we have been able to prepare the compilations of recommendations from ILO, from the Health Ministry and other institutions. A chair of the Department of the Labor Inspector, Tetyana, will be speaking about that later on today. Antonio, while answering questions, has said that in the current situation, we need to try and keep the coronavirus down, and labor inspectors have to work more actively without limits in full compliance with the Convention 129 and 81. The Health Ministry has to enhance supervision over how companies and organizations abide by respective laws that are aimed at protecting people against diseases like that, occupational diseases in particular. We need to see what's the reason behind it. Right now, we can only guess what the reason is. Some say that it happens because there is a shortage of personal protective equipment and low quality of available protective equipment. There has been some response to this from businessmen, volunteers, trade unions, and organizations. They supplied some of the personal protective equipment to medics. They procured some of their equipment, the equipment that is most needed by the medics in this time. You've got 1 minute left to go. So social partners will have a lot of work to do to modify the legislation on health in this country, and OSH legislation in particular. The modified laws need to preserve the key protective provisions of OSH. Well, certainly it will partly depend on the representatives of ours that are going to take part in the joint working group or drafting group. And just to finish it up, I'd like to wish everybody health and success, and may you be able to attain your objectives. After the pandemic and all of this coronavirus, we're going to be growing stronger. Thank you. Thank you, Yuri. I wish it could happen this way and we could be healthier, stronger, and more sophisticated. So, all right, folks, we have spent more than an hour and a half working. And I can see there are 82 participants with us on the platform, plus lots of people are following the Facebook stream. And that's good. We can see the growing audience. That's all right. Let's do this. Let's take a short break for like 10 minutes to have some coffee, tea, and you may watch some of our videos about undeclared work prepared by students of some universities for the public announcement competition. It is also part of our communicative campaign against undeclared work, which was supported by the previous EU-led project, and it was done by the State Labor Service jointly with employers and trade unions. And they would spread word about this among the public. No wonder we're speaking about undeclared work now. These workers are the ones that have lost their jobs in the first place, and they are not eligible for government aid. So COVID has clearly shown the vulnerability of undeclared workers, all of their insecurity, and that's a blatant example. And I think the next stage of this communicative campaign for the rest of the year will get more feedback because these people faced negative consequences of this situation. So what can we do over the break? You can turn off your cameras and microphones, not leave the platform. You can remain online. You can make coffee, watch the videos. At 11:50, we're gonna be happy to welcome you all back in here again. Sergiy Domenko will speak after the break. Okay, 10 minutes and then we're back.
Чи знаєте ви, що незадекларована праця – це проблема в Україні? Незадекларована праця не гарантує оплату працівникам. Незадекларована праця не захищає роботодавців від штрафу за кожного неоформленого працівника. Дізнайтеся більше на сайті Державної служби з питань праці dsp.gov.ua. знаєте ви, що незадекларована праця не захищає ваші трудові та соціальні права? Тільки задекларована праця гарантує вам регулярну заробітну платню, захист від незаконного звільнення, оплачувану відпустку, безпечні та здорові умови праці. Дізнайтеся більше на сайті Державної служби з питань праці dsp.gov.ua.
Пам'ятай, ти в темряві, бо твоя праця не задекларована. Чому? Ти працівник, з яким розраховуються в конверті. Працюєш понад нормою? Говорять дякую, а не оплачують твою роботу. Ти мусиш збирати гроші на відпустку, а міг би оплатити роботодавець. Ти не отримуєш заробітну плату за дні, коли перебуваєш на лікарняному. Ти говориш про свій колосальний досвід, проте він не задокументований. Ти хочеш змінити своє майбутнє? Давай разом з нами. Ми проти незадекларованої праці. Виходь на світло. Ти вартий більшого.
All right, welcome back, everybody. It's good to see you all back. I have a question for Yuri. So Yuri can think it over and then we'll come back to this in the Q&A. There's a question, when are we going to organize the OSH training? So Yuri, keep this question in mind. Later you will be able to answer it. So with this, I'd like to turn over to the representative of the Confederation of Free Trade Unions, Sergiy. I'd like to first off say hello to my colleagues, fellow labor inspectors, and that's what our trade union is about. It all dates back to 1917 of the previous century. So we still are on it, and we're still doing this important trade union work of OSH and all that it implies. We do it at workplaces where fellow unionists are working. I like the questions that Antonio has received, and Sofia says, labor inspectorate can work even online. So with us, State Labor Inspectorate actually used that function even before quarantine. Trade unions always suggested that state supervision is not done too well in this country. It's not that we're not implementing Convention 129 and 81. You know, the State Labor Inspectorate used to have huge powers, the Confederation of Free Unions made its comments on the government report of how Ukraine implemented the both conventions. And we give examples where Ukraine violated the articles of those two conventions. So the national legislation on OSH is well ramified. It's broad, and it's actually in line with the trend of the ILO in OSH. So OSH is above all. But in reality, as previous presenters suggested, things might be pretty different from what we see in the official papers and documents. We are too slow in doing what we're supposed to do. I remember when the quarantine was announced, and there have been some restrictions after that, but people didn't actually do what they were supposed to do. There is a faulty government supervision, and you know of a restaurant which was open in spite of the quarantine, and people would go there. So without a proper supervision, things would spin out of control. And some reporters just found out about that, and then it became a matter of public record. So we need to try and see how coronavirus can be kept under control. In Finland, in stores and shops, they came up with a simple trick. That's what they did. It's a simple thing, and it helps you avoid touching the handle, the door handle. And that's one of the technical solutions which helps keep the virus incidence down. In the Ukraine, over the last 3 years, a project has been held, and quite some proposals have been developed in the course of it. Trade unions took part in that pretty actively, and they did a lot. They did a lot in the sector of OSH. They have implemented the analysis, trying to see if the Ukraine legislation is in line with the framework EU OSH directive. I think we're going to do everything we possibly can in order to make sure that this report be translated into life, so all of these findings could become a real deal. We need to come up with a proactive policy on OSH. We need to make sure that work conditions could be improved. It should be understood as a favorable investment in a company, in the economy. There should be stimulators in the economy so that employers would see a benefit in improved work conditions. They need to see an economic benefit behind it. It's gonna take some time to get it done, but we just need to keep doing this together, I think. COVID-19 has done some important things. In the ILO, there are certain estimates that have been used over years, and in the whole world, they expect to see about 2 million women and men gone because of the effects of work-related accidents and processes. But there has never been a public response to that. In this country, we have quite a high injury rate, and that's what Yuri has told us. Over the last 3 months of this year, in this country, according to official data, there have been 907 accidents, and 98% of them are people that have been injured lethally. But official statistics, however, or actually the update suggests that the injury rate is 1.403, and one of those is lethal. So we can see a difference between official records and the real situation. And those are appalling numbers. Somebody might believe it's all right, but it's not all right. COVID-19 has made certain corrections to the way in which this situation is perceived. And we now need to look at the work conditions for medics in particular. You've got 1 minute to go. So we as trade unionists have to do something about that. COVID-19 is a way of testing our practices. So sometimes they prohibit something, but nobody can keep it under control. There should be safe protocols for medics, but they cannot do much without personal or collective protective equipment. And one more thing, some workers have to be doing their work without having appropriate protective equipment. So again, people in the front line are jeopardized and they are devoid of government aid or government supervision over their work conditions. So I'd like for the trade unions to possibly aid in overcoming this pandemic. I think we're going to be able to make it happen and we're going to be able to protect workers. Sofia also rightly says that we have to be focused on OSH primarily. That's a big sector of economy which has been hit by the pandemic. People lost their jobs and it's going to be hard to protect them against the pandemic and against the fact they have lost their jobs. A choice between work and life should never be there in the first place. Thank you. Thank you, Sergiy. I like to hear you say that COVID should be perceived uniformly. We're not enemies to each other. We have one enemy, which is the COVID, and we have to join our efforts in order to do something about that. That's going to be a benefit to everybody, workers, medics, the government as a whole. So let's move on to the next presentation now, which is about an acute issue, COVID as an occupational disease. So in what case can it be recognized as an occupational disease? Let's have more about that from Ludmyla Kharchuk, State Labor Service of the Ukraine. You've got 10 minutes, and after that, we're going to have it from Denis Varyvonchyk. Ludmyla, you've got your 10 minutes. Hello, everyone. Congratulations on your Red Letter Day. I wish you all good health because that's what we need the most right now because of this pandemic and everything that it implies for this country and the whole world. Our service is trying to timely investigate the cases of infected medics. In which cases is coronavirus considered an occupational disease? There is a law which says that infectious diseases contracted by medics and others at work under hazardous conditions, so their work implies providing services, working with agents, patients that carry those agents, using disinfectants, all of that belongs to the categories of occupational disease. The investigative procedure for that is determined by the routine in the Ordinance of the Cabinet of Ministers 337. In order to timely investigate a case of infected medic, we need to consider the findings of the epidemiologic investigation, which is done by epidemiologists of the Epidemiology Center in the Health Ministry. All commissions now feature an epidemiologist. If there is none on the commission, then we make a request with laboratories in order to get findings of the epidemiologic investigation. Based on that, a decision is made to establish an association between the disease and work conditions. If we can see a professional occupational contact, then we make a report and it serves as a background for making it an occupational disease case. It's going to be taken on board if a person gets some remote effects of this exposure. It can be something respiratory or even something chronic in future. And then over time, we will be able to investigate cases of chronic occupational diseases caused by the consequences of coronavirus infection in medics. Last week, the Cabinet of Ministers made changes to the Ordinance 1662, the list of occupational diseases. Section 5, the list of infectious diseases, now features coronavirus. The Health Ministry now needs to determine the final list of respective occupations which can be considered the ones where you can get occupational diseases. In the site of the State Labor Service, you get daily updates on the number of messages that come to the service. Today, we have 1,405 notifications of infected medics. The riskiest profession right now is nurses. A medical nurse, 559 cases, a junior nurse, 325 cases. And then infectious disease specialists, anesthesiologists, they're also quite vulnerable to occupational diseases. There are 10 completed investigations. Among them, we have established 7 cases of coronavirus, which is work-related. In other cases, we couldn't see that association because the virus was contracted domestically. So we get daily updates, we analyze particular diseases. Based on these updates, we organize meetings and we use the protocol, and we can see that people who run health facilities have to report updates to territorial authorities every time a medic has been infected. But not all of these people do this. Not all of them report those cases adequately. So we work tightly with the health ministry to make it better. We had issues with some laboratories. They would not provide updates and findings of epidemiologic investigations. Back on Friday, we checked with the chief sanitary doctor of Ukraine and discussed it with him. So maybe next week they will take care of this and we will be able to do all of the investigations timely in case of infected medics. Speaking of reasons, it's low quality of protective equipment. You don't get enough of that protective equipment, and very often they do not do the triage of patients. So you get coronavirus patients and everybody else in the same space. And we didn't train the doctors on time to recognize the problem. So many of them could not use individual protective gear, personal protective gear appropriately, especially in case of coronavirus. They didn't know how to put it on correctly and how to maintain it and how to handle patients. But we're gonna get more detailed statistics once we have completed 59% of cases of coronavirus in medics. Thank you. There is a comment and a question, and they're pretty much alike, so let me read this. We're not going to be answering it right now. You just listen to the question and think it over. We're going to address it again in the Q&A session. So there are 2 comments which are pretty much alike. It's about SLS and the state insurance fund. So one comment says this: hospitals report pressure from the social insurance fund because the fund wants the hospitals to refrain from reporting COVID-19 cases. They say these cases should not be investigated because in order to do it, you need to have the findings confirmed by the laboratory. We believe that the investigation committee should get the COVID confirmation first, and they need to establish the fact that the medic was at work when the infection happens. So they need to somehow establish the fact that the worker was at work when the COVID was around. And it doesn't matter if the investigation was going on at that time. If the epidemiologic investigation is done, it should be done within the investigative commission. So what do you think about that sort of statement from the state insurance fund? Among the participants, I have seen somebody from that fund. If you're still with us, please respond to that through the chat, because I think this question is relevant to 2 institutions, and I would like to hear about this from them both. Let me answer this because, you know, my time is limited and there are many things that should be handled at work these days. Speaking of investigations, if we investigate a case of infected medic, well, there are actually two investigations in one. We cannot wait until the epidemiologic investigation is over. We've got a case of an infected medic. The man in charge of the hospital where it happened should do particular steps. This person should report it to the territorial health board, and that's going to be a case report. Laboratories will do their part of the investigation. If it's just one case, it's one story. If it's several cases, then a committee of inquiry is established featuring an epidemiologist, and the epidemiologist reports the findings of the epidemiologic investigation. They need to establish the fact that there is a association between the infection and the work that person was doing. We need to see that report first. So these are the two processes that happen at the same time. We do consider the findings of epidemiologic investigation. There is an established routine and procedure for that, and nobody can stop this from happening. We got a letter from the Kiev-based trade union on this. It was sent to the Ministry of Social Policy. The fund is subordinated to the Ministry of Social Policy. But this is the kind of situation which is impossible. It should not happen in the first place. Right now, medics are in the front line. They are defending lives and health of everybody else, and we don't need to wait until some other investigation is done. Time is luxury, time is of essence, and nobody knows what kind of remote ill effects you're gonna get. Some people are already sick and we need to protect them, protect those infected doctors. That's our key objective, we need to protect our medics. We work with trade unions on that quite closely. We drafted a collaboration agreement with them. So it's between the SLS and the trade union of medics. Thank you, Ludmyla. I hope that everybody has gotten more clarity on this right now. So you know where it's at, you work with all of these people immediately, and I guess further elucidations will appear as they come. So I'd like to turn over to Denise Varyvonchyk now, representing Kundiev Institute of Occupational Health, and we're going to discuss preventive practices at work related to COVID situation. Tetyana will speak next. So Denise, good morning, dear participants. Thank you, Ludmyla, for this talk. I will continue some of the points you have indicated in your little presentation. The technical inspectorate of the trade unions has been established pretty much. It happened pretty much at the same time when the institute was established, about 90 years ago. We have the Department of Occupational Health in that institute and other departments. So we celebrated 100 years anniversary not so long ago. Today we're going to speak about operational indicators, and they are the key indicators that allow us to see if we handle the epidemic appropriately in the country and what can we do better. In this country so far we have seen more than 18.5 thousand infected people which have COVID-19. More than 5,000 medics have been used to do something about that. You get 140 hospitals out there assisting patients. 247 of them are in reserve, 49 are laboratories and private laboratories which are involved in testing. Staff is still an issue. We don't have enough staff, in other words. So more than 73, well, hospitals have 73% of the staff requirement. And we can still see a high rate of infection among medics, it is 3,600, which is more than 19 or even 20% of the total of people infected in this country. Currently, we can see updates given even a higher number, so it's now 40% of the total of people infected, so 40% of medics are affected. You can see the growing rates of infection in the population and in the medical community in particular, and it comes in waves, as you can see. So there is an organizational component to that. That's the breakdown by days and weeks. The maximum registration happens on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Maybe it is related to the peculiarities of offering health services to workers and patients. Maybe it's related to the workload of laboratories these days. Let's look at the map of prevalence of COVID-19 in the country. Right now, we can see the dominance of it in Kiev city and in Chernivtsi. As far as medics are concerned, especially the ones that have been infected, well, that data totally matches the intensity of the epidemic process. It allows us to say that detection of medics is not adequate, and we may assume that quite many medics have been infected already, but they have never been detected up to this day. Yes, medics do contract this disease, and that's the pie chart, which shows us different categories of medics and their respective rates of infection. So 44% is the middle tier medical personnel, then doctors, first line medics, and others. There's one other category of medics that have been affected, and those are social workers. Unfortunately, we don't have much of an information about that. Nobody actually registered those people as patients, and that's why we didn't have data on that. Let's look now at the medics that contracted SARS and COVID-2. You can see that the Ukraine is in the same cluster with the countries like Russia, the United States, the UK, where medics are affected up to 18%. And there are three major reasons: breach of infectious control, lack of clear plan of action, and nobody knows what are the appropriate routes for patients, what are the standards of care for patients, and how to exercise the control. Next thing is that you have staff shortage, not enough PPEs. PPEs are used wrongly and maintained wrongly. Work intensity goes up, so people work too hard and too much, and that's why very often they work in breach of precautionary procedures, and it affects the overall situation in the country. These are the acute occupational diseases official statistics. It looks like this. It also comes in waves. So on the weekends, you do not have many cases. Typically, you get most of them on Thursday and Friday at the end of the work week. If we look at the PPE situation, well, it is still poor for quite a while. On average, you get 70% of what they need in terms of PPEs. They need antiseptic substances, eye shields, respirators, all sorts of masks, gloves, disposable gloves, and this is never enough. Coats, isolation coats, bioprotection gear. The Cabinet of Ministers has reported that all of this gear is now in the country, but no one has seen it. No hospital has seen it yet, so there's still quite a shortage of PPEs. This graph shows that there has been a 13% improvement in the supplies of PPEs since early April, but it's never 100%. Right now, it's about 70%. That's the PPE supplies to hospitals. Let's look at the regions of the country where we have the highest prevalence of COVID among medics: Chernivtsi region and Kiev City. All PPEs, except a few, like eye shields in Kiev City, coats, bioprotection gear in Kiev City, are undersupplied. But still, it's not 100% anywhere. Death statistics for the medics, we can see this in yellow, it keeps going up as the overall mortality rate goes up in these groups of population. Average lethality rate of the medics is 0.74%, compared to lethality of the overall population, 2.9%, it is lower. But if we compare this against other countries, 0.4% is the worst among the countries where you can see an intense epidemic. In terms of risk assessment, the risk of increased infection among medics exceeds more than 12% the average rate in the population. Acute infectious disease among medics, which offer services to patients, is 65% above the norm, and lethality rate among the medics is 5% lower than the average for the population. So all in all, we keep monitoring this thing. The ILO has implemented a study on prevention of TB and HIV at workplaces, and these materials come in handy now to combat this epidemic in this country. Thank you very much, Denise, and all of the presentations will be uploaded in full in the website of the project, and you will be able to check it out and produce feedback. So medics are in focus right now. As they're going to alleviate the quarantine, more people are expected to go back to work, and I think we need to think of other workers, because the risk of getting infected will still be around, and it may even be going up as many people will keep going back to work. So we need to keep them posted, we need to keep them in the loop. They need to know how to rightly use the PPE, how to go back to work safely enough. So that's going to be topical for all categories of workers. And with this, I'd like to turn over to Tetyana, representing the Department of OSH in the Federation of Trade Unions, and she wants to share some of the recommendations they have developed about the COVID. It is a pleasure to speak with you again after a long break. It's a pleasure to see so many people joining in. It's a progressive way of doing it, but this gadget and digitalization can never replace immediate communication we used to have at conferences. So I think we're going to go back to that someday. So I'd like to speak on behalf of the Technical Inspectorate and congratulate our fellow colleagues and veterans on the 102nd anniversary of the Technical Labor Inspectorate in this country. We had hard times from time to time, and these days it's happening again. And we still keep on working even under these circumstances. And I think we have an important mission to accomplish. And I'm saying this to all of the fellow colleagues, technical inspectors. Congratulations on the anniversary to all of you folks. I wish you all good health. And I have sent you some. Oh, it has cropped up. Okay. So that's actually the congratulation. It's like a postcard. So I wish you health and success. And it's not easy to do things right now, but may coronavirus be away from you. And then let's look at this. These are some historic data, and we prepared this to celebrate the 100th anniversary, the centennial anniversary of the Inspectorate. So let me find this slide. The decree on the Labor Inspectorate was ratified by the Ukrainian People's Republic in 1918, and later on the Ukrainian National Council ratified it. But initially it was a meeting of the council in the Ministry of the Ukrainian People's Republic where they have recognized this institution. So the decree on the labor inspectorate has been effective in this country ever since. And we believe that's when the technical inspectorate of the trade unions has been established. So they elected inspectors following recommendations from trade unions. So we believe these are the sources of our practices, and this inspectorate has been modified a few times, but it has been around up to this day. And when they passed the respective law, the inspectorate gained official powers and trade unions exercise public watch. You will be able to see this presentation in full, so there's going to be no problem with that. The recommendations, so let me just tell you about that. The recommendations about main actions to be taken to protect life and health of workers. In this presentation, I begin by saying that starting the 11th, we're going to have the first stage of alleviating the quarantine measures. On the 24th of April, the Prime Minister presented 5 stages of removing the quarantine. There's an entire plan for that. Can you see the slides now? Yes, we can. All right. So we need to have at least an idea of where it's at. So this is the quarantine removal plan. And it says that starting the 11th of May, it's going to be stage 1 of this alleviation. Then on the 22nd of June, it's going to be stage 2. Stage 3 will happen on the 1st of July. Stage 4, 11th of July. And stage 5, that means no more quarantine. But the Prime Minister says that the stages 3, 4, and 5 mean the completion of the quarantine, but they will monitor the epidemiologic situation. And there are different levels indicated by different colors, and they will let you see if alleviation is possible. If an outbreak happens somewhere, then appropriate measures will be taken. Up to the 22nd of May, some of these restrictions are still going to be in effect. After the 22nd of May, the Cabinet of Ministers will convene and make decisions to alleviate the quarantine restrictions. And then the Prime Minister will announce what's going to be done next. So what can we expect in the nearest future? The Prime Minister says that if we alleviate the quarantine still, there will be some restrictions in place. And he calls it the economy of inviolability. You've got 1 minute to go. I need 5 more minutes. That's going to be too expensive, I'm sorry. Okay, social distancing, using PPEs, and other restrictions. The Cabinet of Ministers believes that even within these minimum restrictions, even if the quarantine is gone, we're going to still have these restrictions in effect towards the end of this year and maybe into the next year. So we should not be sitting on our hands. We need to understand that these measures are needed. We're going to be trying to keep things under control. We're going to keep protecting the workers and population at large, all the way up to the end of this year and into the next year. You just need to know this. The Cabinet of Ministers says that restrictions are going to be removed in such a way that everything is going to be safe, and there will be social distancing, disinfection for hands, and there will be other measures in place. So I don't have time to go through all of that. There are some risks for medics in these slides. So ever since the quarantine has happened, our experts have been able to draft recommendations on preventive measures. There are recommendations for key trade unions and what they can do. Trade unions have to take these recommendations on board. They're based on the ILO materials and cabinet of ministers and so on. Okay, you're supposed to be done, I'm sorry. Well, in order to apply all of that, in order to help people return back to work, we need to abide by these recommendations. This will help protect workers better. There is a checklist for trade union control. Some people know what I'm talking about. It's the Elmer technique. You determine the safety of a workplace based on epidemiologic measures. There are some flyers that workers get, and it's a brief information about their rights and how to do things right. So we're gonna make this available to all of our affiliates and participants of webinar. I wish I had more time to tell you more, and just the very last slide. Thank you very much indeed. So all of the slides are gonna be there, and your time is up. I'm really sorry, it's just the rule. Thank you. So with this, we're gonna move on to the last presentation. In the meanwhile, you all can think about questions. There's going to be some time for a Q&A in the end of the webinar, and we're going to address the questions we have received. So I would like to turn over to the Federation of Trade Unions, Diana Kazakova, Lead Inspector on OSH, Department of OSH of the FPU. You've got 5 minutes. Hello, everybody. Needed to go back to work, actually, urgently. And I'm speaking for both of us in this case. So this is a very topical subject, and I appreciate the organizers and everybody else for making this event possible. It's a good way of discussing things. So we need to see if COVID-19 can be considered an accident with some workers. At least we can see that this case must be investigated, and there is an investigation procedure which is mentioned in the routine Ordinance 337, which dates back to the 17th of April of 2019. This presentation will be available in full after the webinar. Acute industrial disease is the one that you get after one exposure. It can be different things, infectious and others. The diagnosis of the acute occupational disease is made by the doctor in a hospital after consultations with other doctors. With us, coronavirus is an acute occupational disease, and it's an infectious kind of disease. The diagnosis is made by the infectious disease specialist based on the epidemiologic investigation mentioned by Ludmyla. The cases of acute occupational disease get investigated, but we also need to understand that acute occupational diseases are related to certain categories of workers only. The investigation is done in the lab, where you get the confirmation of cases in medics and other workers related to doing their work under elevated risk of COVID-19. So you don't need to think that all workers that are working somewhere, if they contract coronavirus, they will get it as acute occupational disease. No, it's not true. There are certain limits, and only some categories of workers can get it as an occupational disease, acute case officially. There are certain algorithms of actions that we use in investigating these cases. There is an event, infection of a medic. So you gotta investigate the case, you gotta make a report based on N1 form, an F5 form to make it an occupational disease case. The goal of this investigation is to draw up the paperwork to offer social aid to victims. And one more thing, it is to undertake measures to make sure that these accidents of acute occupational diseases will never happen again. There is an existing procedure, so in case of infection, a report should go out about that. The report covers all cases of infection in medics. It all goes up to the territorial health board and respective other institutions mentioned in the routine. The report also goes to the trade unions. We can see that nowadays the investigations are done only in cases of medics, in hospitals, and most of that is done by trade unions. So a man in charge of a hospital should be aware of the fact of infection of a medic. If it's a special investigation, then a report goes out to the primary trade union and sectoral trade union, which is up the chain. So trade unions are involved in this from the very outset, once the report has been issued. In an enterprise, they can organize the committee of inquiry, and it will include somebody from the trade union and from the workers. The SLS is the key institution in the country which controls and takes part in keeping records of these accidents. Doctors are serving on all commissions, no matter if it's a commission in the company or somewhere else. If it's a special investigation, then the commission is established in the SLS. If the consequences are severe or lethal, as we saw earlier, we have had 27 doctors dying at work because of COVID infection. So if we speak about the special commission organized by the SLS, it involves two representatives of the union, one from the primary organization and one from the trade union organization of a higher level. That's important because trade unions exercise public watch over how requirements are met and how investigations are done. So trade union must be involved in the proceedings of the commission like that. The timeline is 5 days. That's for the commission and the company, 15 in case of a special investigation, and you may extend the length of the investigation under certain circumstances. There are certain requirements on the commission that you can see here. Let me just tell you that in this current situation today, in this pandemic, all members of the commission have to abide by preventive and protective measures, and they have to consider the restrictions that happened under quarantine. So the commission proceedings happen in special conditions, but it doesn't change anything. All of the requirements are in effect on the commission, and it must meet all of them no matter what. And one more point, each investigation has to end up with a report based on N1 form. If you have the findings of the investigation as an official record, then people can be eligible for social aid and some compensations from the social insurance fund if this is recognized a work-related accident. And one more thing, we all can see statistics. We can see that about 40% of all the infected people in this country are medics. And I can see statistics of the health ministry. You get more than 3,500 doctors infected in this country. The statistics from the SLS indicates 1,400 cases are under investigation. Those are reported cases, and that's quite a big difference between the two. And that's where there is a lot of room for improvement for trade unions as well. Rights of unionists. Well, they exercise public watch, as I said, and they can initiate a reinvestigation if they can see that the initial investigation was faulty. And under established routines, the sources of information for the SLS and the reason for setting up a special commission can be a report from the primary trade union. And we can see that we have lots of doctors, lots of medics out there. You've got 2 minutes. Okay. Which have been infected by now, but those cases have not been investigated up to this day. So here is my point to trade unions and employers and victims themselves. You need to keep labor in the point. Make sure the investigation be done, because you get 2,000 uninvestigated cases here. The SLS cannot do much about that because the inspections are banned. So we need to go ahead and do something about that. If you know people get infected, there is a hotline medics can use to report a case. So you use that, you do something, labor the point, make sure your case gets investigated because you contracted this disease at work. The rights of a victim, you can see it in this slide, control over quality in the SLS, in the fund, in the trade unions. Trade unions are an important part of these things. I'd like to wish all of you health, and may we be able to flatten the curve, and may we can see 0 as a number of infected people. Hopefully we're going to be doing fine. Thank you all. Thank you, Diana. It's very informative and sensible, so we will gladly share these updates with the rest of the participants. I'd like to thank all of the presenters. We're done with the presentations. And there are 2 questions, and we have a few minutes to address them. There was a question for Yuri. When are you going to do the training on OSH? And question number 2 was for the Social Insurance Fund, and the fund representative, Sergiy, will tell us something about the role of the Social Insurance Fund. So let's have it from Yuri and then from Sergiy. Yuri, are you there somewhere? All right, speaking of the training, I think in fall we're gonna organize the training of a group. So it's gonna happen. The training is gonna happen. If nothing keeps us from doing that. That's in our plans, and we'll get a budget for that too. Thank you. Well, if something happens, if something wrong happens, then check with us. Maybe we'll figure out a way to do it online, that training. Okay, let's have it from Sergiy now. I would like to say hello to trade units and congratulate them on their Red Letter Day. And I'd like to wish all of you guys health, perseverance. Secondly, speaking of reports we receive, in the fund, all of the units and departments are supposed to accept reports. That's the requirement of the routine 337. We exercise daily control over reports that come to us. Across the country, so far we have seen 1,500 of those reports. In Kiev City, where that problem occurred, has seen 187 reports. The executive directorate looked into this. They checked with the Kiev office of the fund. There is item 8 in the report which goes to the fund, which is about circumstances in the regions for an acute occupational disease. And there have been some reports saying that people were on vacation, but the hospital made a report of an acute occupational disease. So that was the case which was untypical, and we have handled that, and all of our units keep receiving reports like this, and they join the investigations of respective cases. Thank you. So, dear colleagues, participants, partners, and friends, this event is nearing its end, and we should do some kind of wrap up at this moment. We need to tell you what we're going to do further. I'd like to turn over back to Antonio Santos, the chair of the project, and he will actually do the wrap up for today. Antonio, back over to you.
Thank you so much, Sofia. Thank you to all participants. Thank you to our keynote speakers. Thank you to our technical support team that ensured the organization, technical aspects of the organization of this webinar, and also its streamlining through YouTube and Facebook pages of the project. And also to my friend Serhiy, who is ensuring that I understand what you are saying and is translating what I am saying. Thank you, Serhiy. Well, our webinar is approximating to the end. It's time to make a wrap up. But before that, I would like to make two comments to the interventions of Yuri Andriyevsky, and also to the intervention of our colleague that I suppose then is Varyvonchyk, that addressed the question regarding the pension fund. So, as for the comment to the intervention of Yuri Andriyevsky, to respond to the question on the trainings on OSH promoted by the Federation of Trade Unions of Ukraine, I would like to tell Yuri that he can count on the EU-ILO project to help him to organize these trainings on OSH for workers. And this invitation is obviously extended to the Confederation of the Free Trade Unions of Ukraine. We are more than happy to help to organize the trainings on OSH, and we will be happy to contribute to that. So feel free to get back to us on that. We will be more than happy to help. As for the comment on the pension fund and regarding the inquiries or investigations on occupational diseases, well, I would say that the problem is a bit deeper than that. To my mind, and I already expressed it several times in several documents, I think that the investigations of work-related accidents, by the way, and also occupational diseases should not be conducted by a commission. They should be conducted by an independent organ which does not have any interest on the results of the investigations. Because what happens in Ukraine, as you know, is that either on the investigations of work-related accidents, the more serious ones, and the ones that are fatal or the ones that involve several workers, are done by a commission. And the same applies to the investigation of the work-related diseases or occupational diseases. But the problem is that that commission, besides incorporating the Labor Inspectorate, the SLS, for example, or another state organization, it also integrates that commission, the representatives of the workers, the representatives of the employers, and the representatives of the pension fund. And that is a problem, to my mind, because, for example, the employers have a direct interest in disqualifying the occurrence as a work-related accident or as an occupational disease, because they can be liable if, in fact, that occurrence is declared as an occupational accident or an occupational disease. The pension fund, on the other hand, also has a particular interest on the results of the investigation, because if it is considered a work-related accident or an occupational disease, they have to pay the compensation. So they are interested, as the employers, to consider that work-related accident or that occupational disease is not work-related accident or is not occupational diseases. And the workers the same. They are interested in that is being considered an occupational accident or an occupational disease. So, to my mind, the investigation of work-related accidents and occupational diseases should be done exclusively by the labor inspectorate, by labor inspectors. And of course, labor inspectors should have the power to ask help of any available expert that they need. And those experts would have the obligation to provide all the assistance needed. And it's not just regarding experts, it's regarding workers, workers' representatives, employers, employers' representatives, or any other service of the state, laboratories that could help to find the causes and the nature of the accident or the disease that occurred. So, and of course, this is without prejudice to the legal competencies that other state authorities might have, depending on the nature of the accident. Because if it is an accident with an airplane, probably the flight authority will also have competence to verify. If there is any evidence of being committed a crime, the public prosecutor's office and the police should also have legal competence to investigate. If it is an accident with a train, probably the railway authority would have also competence to investigate the work-related accident. But the point is that clearly the participation of the mandatory participation of the employer and the pension fund on the commissions to investigate work-related accidents or diseases can generate conflict of interest, and that can conditionate or has a negative impact on the results of those investigations. So they should participate if if and when their collaboration is requested by the labor inspectors that should investigate those incidents. So, and getting back to the wrap up of this webinar, I took some notes and I will try to synthesize the very important and interesting inputs that I heard during this webinar. First of all, I think we should consider that coronavirus, besides a problem of public health, is also an occupational hazard, and it's contagious during work should be considered, of course, an occupational risk. And as such, it should be dealt with as we should dealt with any other occupational risks. The risk management system is the same. The risk management process is the same as it happens with any other occupational risks. The difference is on the concrete measures, preventive and protective measures that should be adopted, which should take into account the specific nature of this virus and the way it is transmitted. Moreover, employers have the responsibility to assess risks resulting from the exposure of workers to coronavirus and control them through the implementation of the most adequate occupational safety and health preventive and protective measures. Workers, on the other hand, should also take care of their own occupational safety and health and that of others that can be influenced or affected by their actions or omissions. And they should also inform and cooperate with the employer in matters of OSH, in particular regarding risk assessment and the risk control, meaning risk estimation, risk valuation, and also implementation of the most appropriate preventive and protective measures to eliminate or reduce the probability of the occurrence and also to eliminate or diminish the consequence, the seriousness of the consequences of its occurrence. And also implementation, I think it's pretty fair to admit that the implementation of adequate occupational safety and health management systems at business level, at state services level, wherever there is a work being performed, should contribute to reduce the negative impacts of COVID-19 pandemic, or by the way of any other, or the risks arising from any other biological, chemical agent or risk present at the workplace. Moreover, it is also important to highlight, for example, something that Hrygoriy Osovy stressed, which is that OSH should be strengthened within the collective agreements. OSH should really be considered a priority when it comes to collective bargaining, and to ensure that on the collective agreements there are specific provisions regulating OSH at the workplaces. Another interesting remark was made by Yuri Andriyevsky when he told us that social partners will have a lot of work to do on changing the OSH legislation in Ukraine. And that's true, It is fundamental, it is imperative that Ukraine transposes the European Union OSH legal framework, starting on the EU-OSH framework directive. And we are more than happy to help the social partners in the government doing so. We are here for that. So please use us and abuse us on that. Another note to a comment of Serhiy Symenko, which stressed, first of all, that COVID-19 had the merit of testing us, of testing the OSH systems in Ukraine, and it really did. And also to point out one thing that he commented that I think it's usually important is that labor inspectors in Ukraine lack the powers they need to discharge their duties. And that is very worrying. And well, as you know, labor inspection legal framework in Ukraine is not aligned with ILO Conventions 81 and 129, which were ratified by Ukraine, as the ILO competent bodies already commented. So I think it also be important. It also would be very important to ensure that labor inspectors have the powers they need to really help the employers and help the workers to improve working conditions at the workplaces, and in particular in what refers to occupational safety and health. Moreover, I would like to also point out the interventions of Diana Kazakova and also Ludmyla Kharchuk, especially in what concerns the fact that, according to Ukrainian legislation, the infection disease is contracted by specific types of workers, namely by medical staff and nurses, during work in contact with specific agents, like, for example, COVID, might be considered an occupational disease following an epidemiological investigation, as foreseen in legislation. They also point out that, in their opinion, one of the reasons why the incidence of these infections on medical staff that can justify this higher incidence of medical staff has to do not just only with the degree of exposure and the frequency and the duration of exposure of these professionals to this coronavirus, but also, and that is a bit worrying, with a lack of training and information on the way, and lack of PPEs and lack of information and training how to use them properly, and that is very worrying. And I think measures should be taken in order to address this problem. But it's also important to stress that medical staff and nurses are not the only professions that are exposed to COVID-19. Everybody is exposed to COVID-19. It is important to recognize, however, that medical staff and nurses are more exposed because the frequency of exposure and the duration of the exposure is higher. But let's not forget of other workers that are also very much exposed to COVID, coronavirus contagious, especially workers engaged in the provision of essential services, like the doctors and the nurses. And I remember, for example, the policemen, the transportation, the people that work in the area of transport of goods, transport of people, people that work on essential services related with energy, electricity, gas, etc. The garbage collection workers, the emergency service workers, etc. All of them are also more exposed to COVID contagions. So we should also address them. But it is also important to note that the measures to address COVID should be the process of managing the risk of COVID contagions are the same as any other risk, and they should be applied. Of course, we know that there are particular situations in which the frequency and the duration of the exposure determines a higher risk of contagions. But if we apply the methodology of risk management and risk assessment, those situations will arise naturally. I would also want to draw your attention to our website, where you can find, probably now we have 10, but we will find more than 25 fact sheets on sector and the profession specific OSH measures to prevent COVID contagions at work, made by the French Director General of Labor, which were translated into Ukrainian by our EU-ILO project. So you can find these tips how to eliminate and reduce the risk of coronavirus contagion in 25 sectors of activity or specific professions. And that's as for the wrap up of the main message and for main aspects. I would say that it's pretty much it. To finalize, just 2 or 3 quick messages to tell you that we will send you today a link to the online feedback form with the assessment of the quality of this webinar. And I really appreciate if you could fill it in, because it's very important for us to get your feedback about this, the webinar, technical aspects, content of the presentations, etc. Because only knowing what you think about this, our performance, we can improve. Upon receipt of this feedback form, the system will automatically send you back a link form, from which you can download the material, all the materials of this seminar, presentation, checklists, and the video record of this webinar, as soon as they are made available. You can also see our project website at ilo.org-shd for Ukraine, where you will find additional information on OSH and COVID, including these 25 fact sheets on sectoral and professional specific OSH measures to prevent COVID contagions at work that were developed by the French Director General of Labor, and that we translated into Ukrainian. Also, I suppose if you have kind of 2-3 minutes, Sofia, I would propose you to quick show to our participants how they can access to these contents on our website. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for participating. We will address the rest of the questions that we didn't have the opportunity to address during this webinar. We will address them through our Facebook page and also through our YouTube channel. Thank you so much. Sofia, over to you.
It took me to the website, and you can see these blocks are in red. That's something for the World OSH Day. It is in Ukrainian now. There's an interesting report of the ILO, which got uploaded a few days ago. It carries important updates. And there is something that goes in addition to that, an appendix to the report. There are interesting references to the EU practices in terms of combating, responding to the COVID-19 in the world of war. You get lots of other materials. You're welcome to go and check it out on your own. The second interesting information here is advice accessible to both employees and employers. That's the experience of the French Labor Inspectorate. Let me open up one of them just as an example. You can download it, you can use that. That's how it looks like. You get updates on COVID and what has been done. Drafting recommendations, preparatory stage, implementation, recommendation for workers as to how they can keep themselves safe and control. It's a total of 27, and there's going to be more, so you're welcome to keep coming back for recent updates on the website. And there's going to be also a section where you're going to get all of the materials used for this webinar. There's going to be materials for trade unions. Tomorrow we're going to do something similar for employers, and on Wednesday we're going to do a corporate event for the SLS, and we're going to share the materials after that as well. So all of this will be found on the website. You're welcome to go there, check it out, get the new updates, and use the amenity of the website. So with this, I think we're as good as done. Thank you all very much indeed for finishing it up with us. Health and good wealth to everybody. Let's keep in touch. I'll see you around. So now you can keep turning it off and getting disconnected. So big thanks to everybody. I'll see you folks around. Thank you.